This is Kuldrin's Krypt, Season 1, Episode 19, for June 12th, 2017.
Welcome. Welcome to my dungeon.
Welcome to Kuldrin's Krypt. I'm your host, Master Kuldrin. If you're new to the show, this is a place to dispel myths, get rid of stereotypes, and answer your questions about BDSM. You can call in at 865-268-4005 to leave your questions, or visit the Krypt at kuldrinskrypt.com. On this episode of the Krypt, Funsize and I are going to dive into the master-slave dynamics. Funsize, how are you doing today?
I'm really good. How are you?
I am doing quite well, wide awake finally on this Sunday afternoon. Let's go ahead and dive first before we get into the master-slave dynamics. Let's hear rules to love by in your beautiful voice.
Our rules to love by are safe, sane, consensual, and informed. KNKI, knowledge, no intolerance, kindness, and integrity. And finally, submission is not about authority. It's not about obedience. It's all about relationships of love and respect. From the lovely Paul Young.
It does sound so much better coming from you than it does from me. So, on into the master...
I think some of our listeners would debate.
Very well. They can go to the Facebook group, Kuldrin's Krypt, a BDSM 101 podcast, and have that debate if they'd like. We'll jump in and participate. To get into the master-slave dynamics, let's come up with some definitions first, as I always like to do. So, masters first. Let's define that. In my opinion, and this is my own personal definition, and I know that you're going to have some things to add because you always do, and I love it. A master defined, to me, is the leader of a fully committed and collared DS relationship responsible for the safety, training, and personal improvement of the slave. The master is also known as the owner. Now, I know you want to take that a little bit further, I'm sure, so go ahead with that.
I would just like to point out that a master is not someone who just takes on the title. It's a title that is earned through the relationship. And that's really all I have to add to that point.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. People come out and these insta-doms especially and like throw their own titles in there. And I think there are those old school ways of looking at it as someone who has been involved in the community for a long, long time and has mastered certain abilities. You know, maybe they're riggers. They're what I would consider to be a master rigger or a master of the flogger or several different implements, not just one necessarily. But in this case, we're strictly maintaining in the relationship aspect for this podcast. Very good. Hey, Master Kuldrin here. If you're having trouble putting together a contract for your DS or MS relationship, or if you just want something nicer, say in soft or hardbound, check out bdsmcontracts.org. I've used them in the past, and I will continue to use them in the future. Use the coupon code Kuldrin20 for a 20% discount off of all purchases. That's bdsmcontracts.org. Slave. Now, my definition for a slave would be the fully collared submissive of a DS relationship, going to that next level, committed to serving their master in every negotiated way, and a slave is also known as property. Now, what else do you have to add to that?
I would also add that these are people who have contracts and do negotiations and renegotiations, which is something that we're going to get into right about now, correct?
I do believe it is. So, for contracts, the contract is something that is negotiated between a dom and a submissive after a great period of time has been spent and they decide to take their relationship to that next level. Now, the contract is not a one and done. It is renegotiated after a certain period of time that is set by the initial contract. Is that how you've done this in the past?
Absolutely. The one MS relationship that I had, we had official renegotiations every 3 months for our contracts, and they just helped us keep things fresh. They helped change things that needed to be changed, and they were a vital security blanket for both of us.
Now, what kind of things did you have in your contract, if you don't mind sharing that?
One of the things we had was we had weekly. Every Sunday, we had set aside for a weekly check-in, which would also be followed by a weekly examination. And that was a fairly normal thing for me. The other thing that we had was a few protocols that I had to follow because we were a low protocol household, which is something that we will get into later, the difference between low and high protocols. But we were low protocol, but I still had protocols that I had to follow, like calling him master. I had to kneel every time he came into the room in a specific position, which most just call kneeling position, unless you're into a Gorian household. And the position was that my feet were together, I was on my knees were together, my back was straight, and my hands were resting in my lap with my chin up but my eyes down as a sign of respect.
For those familiar with the Crow Academy style, that would be position 3.
Yes, it would. And I had the pleasure of watching one of the Crow Academy videos in which Master Arcane, who runs the Crow Academy's lovely slave, Daphne, exhibited that, and she has absolutely wonderful posture. I can't speak higher of her in that position. She's absolutely lovely to behold. So if anyone gets the chance to see that, I definitely recommend watching that video just to get an idea of what it looks like.
So what other things other than protocol was in there? In the contracts that I've had, they're very detailed. And if I know you have, but if the listeners want to find out a good list of limits and interests, the limits and interest survey that I have at kuldrinscrypt.com/contact resources is actually from my last contract.
It's absolutely a wonderful resource, and it is something that's included in most contracts, I would say, is a list of limits and interests, and with them, definitions of what those interests are to that couple. Because, okay, for something like choking, if you have choking in your contract, which is something that actually ended up in my contract after several renegotiations, there was a definition that it was allowed to be done with hands, but not with scarves. Things like that, to really emphasize what the couple wants, because this is a couple and both their needs need to be communicated clearly through these contracts.
Now, what about someone who gives up full rights in their contract? How do you feel about that?
I have never experienced TPE, which is total power exchange, as a relationship myself. I can't speak for personal experience on that, but I do feel like if it's something that you want, it needs to be in a relationship that has been established and the trust built over what for that couple is a substantial period of time.
Yeah. And I bring that up just to point out because most people, when they think master slave, that's what they think of is total power exchange, that the slave is giving up absolute total control. And I've heard some in our community argue that if that is not the case, then it is still a DS relationship and not a master slave relationship, which I personally disagree with.
Oh, I have to disagree with that too, because I've lived it. I have had the MS relationship without the TPE coming into play. And I think that TPE is the next step for those who want to take it as far as MS relationships go. I feel like MS relationships are a very committed and intense form of DS relationships that people can find themselves in and choose to participate in. But not every DS relationship will become an MS relationship, and not every MS relationship will become a total power exchange.
Yeah, it's my personal experience that most do not become a total power exchange. But there again, that's just my personal experience. I know there are a lot of people out there that will not consider moving from a DS to an MS relationship without it. And that's their thing. I don't judge it. I'm just saying that for me, I like a very strong submissive. And when that submissive is turned from a submissive to a slave, I still want them to be strong. Now, that doesn't mean that I like brats. People who know me know that I'm not a brat tamer. It is not really my thing. I commend those who are better equipped to deal with it than I am. But just someone who is strong-willed, strong in their convictions, and strength in what they want out of life and what they're willing to do to get it.
To me, what you're describing is the difference between submissives and slaves and the difference between doormats.
Yes.
And I feel the need to point out that I don't think that just because a slave has entered into a relationship in which they've gone in for a total power exchange, that makes them a doormat. I think they have communicated a need for something more and something different from that relationship. And that's it. Yeah,
I would highly recommend anyone out there considering moving that relationship forward to not go total power exchange right off the bat. And if the Dom has a problem with that, then to me, the problem is all theirs to deal with, and probably somebody that you should reconsider getting into that relationship with. Again, that's my opinion, but I do take a very firm stance on that because that is a level of trust that needs to build.
I have to add to that because I think that to take total power of anyone from a dominant stance is so much pressure. I can't imagine any of the insta-doms out there actually being capable of doing that. And I don't think any of the predatory doms would necessarily care for that because they don't want to have to actually care for another. And the level of care that you have to provide as a dominant to start off with is out there. It's not something that the fake doms do very well grasping to begin with. And then as a master, you're adding to that. And then if you go into TPE, just the very concept of it, where you're having to help make all the decisions all the time and really being in charge of this other person's life 24/7 to the extent where it's 10.0 of a master-slave dynamic. I can't even fathom how much pressure would be on you. So I can't see a newbie dominant wanting that, or a predatory dom, or, even the fake doms.
Oh, I can very much see them wanting it. I just can't see them dealing with it, because to take total control over somebody, these people who are the insta-doms, who have no clue just how much responsibility it is, they're coming into this thinking, well, I can just sit back and relax and have everything done for me. So they're already coming into it with an abusive state of mind. They may not realize it, but they are. And for them to say, okay, I'm in total control. I think that is the abuser's mindset, and that would charge them. I think that would charge them even more to want it, but they're not going to handle it. It's going to blow up in their face. Unfortunately, the submissive or the slave is the one that's going to suffer the most injury from it, whether that be physical injury because they're dealing with someone who has no clue how to handle the implements that they may be using, or the psychological effects of what they're actions are. I mean, there's just so many things, but to someone who is just by nature an abuser, you can't get any more arousing than the thought of having total power over somebody else. So I think that's something that they absolutely need to watch out for. And that's why it's so important for me personally to recommend to people, never do this straight out of the gate. A dom will be in no hurry. They may want it. They may have such love and respect for that submissive or that slave that they are anxious and excited to take it to that level, but they're not going to push for it. It's something that is negotiated, and you can't come at it. Anybody that comes at it with a pushiness is somebody who is looking to abuse, in my experience. And I believe that 100% of the time.
I have to agree with you there. And I think another dual side of that is that submissives that come right out of the gate and say that they want that, in my experience, they're probably pretty new. Most of the ones I've met are pretty new to the lifestyle.
Yeah, they have no clue what they're getting
into.
They're
one of the Insta subs where they read 50 Shades of Grey. They're like, oh, that sounds fun. I'll try that. I want TPE. I don't want to have to deal with any of the stress in my life. But it's just going to end up with them getting hurt in one form or another, or harmed in one form or another.
Yeah. So on those contracts, the way that I have typically done it is you set them up for a certain period of time, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. I think 3, 6, 9 and a year is generally how they go, sometimes up to 2 years. But most people, I think, keep them around 6 months or 9 months. And then you come back after that period of time. You have a break of some type in your master-slave relationship, in my experience, and how most people that I know do that. And then you renegotiate. You go over what you've learned from it if you want to continue it. But all the different things that are in that contract, it is so extensive. And somebody emailed me one. It was right after Christmas. The podcast was very new, and someone emailed me one, and it was a single page, and it was almost total power exchange. There was like 3 things on there that was noted that was the submissive's hard limit, and I emailed them back, and it was just like, are you serious? I actually thought it was a joke, the way that it was worded. And I mean, how extensive are the contracts that you've seen?
The contract that I had with my master, we did a contract, which was a draft contract. We renegotiated it. We did a secondary draft, renegotiated it, and then we finally had a final contract. The first draft contract, I believe, came out to just over 4 pages. The second draft was around 6 pages, but the final contract actually came out to 13 pages when I printed it out. And I printed it out just because I wanted to keep it as a memento for me. They served no legal purposes, but it was very extensive. We had our list of interests and limits, hard and soft. For soft limits, we had timelines of our ideals of when to try them and goals with that. We had definitions of what things were and how far we were willing to take each individual thing. We had timelines for check-ins, when to renegotiate, how long our debriefing period in between the contract and renegotiation would be. It was extremely extensive, but it gave us both a sense of better communication and security. I definitely recommend making extensive contracts. What were yours like?
Pretty much the same way. Now, I cheated. And, and I have no shame in this. There are websites that offer these services to give you a foundation, and that is how I recommend that you use them. And some of them are free that you can find. I've not found any of the free ones that are very good. The ones that are paid are a lot better. It's about $20, but you don't just use it. You've got to make it personal. You add a lot to it. I mean, some of these are like 8 pages long, and then by the time it's done, like you said, we're looking at 13 pages or so. And I think the final one after renegotiations, after the first contract had ended up adding maybe 2 or 3 more pages of things that was just very specific things that we had learned and that we wanted to continue in learning.
I have to agree with that. I was with my master for just over 3 years, and by the time that our last renegotiation came through, I think we ended up with over 20 pages.
Wow. And you said you were
added.
You were debriefing and renegotiating every 3 months?
Every 3 months.
And that was for the entire 3 years?
That was for the entire 3 years.
Boys and girls, that is the correct way to do it. I will commend you on that, because most people will start to lengthen that amount of time. And I think that in some cases that's okay, but typically I think you really want to stay 3 to 6 months. And this is a 101 podcast, so I'm trying to stick to the basics here.
I will admit we did have in one of our renegotiations a topic where we had discussed lengthening it to 6 months, but we decided against it because we felt like 3 months was a good check-in point for us to renegotiate and to go over everything that we had been doing. Yeah. So it was discussed. It was. And that was actually included as part of a renegotiation. I
think that's awesome. And I'm always big on saying, it's your BDSM. You make it how it fits best for you. But there are tried and true methods that I think people need to make sure when they're new and coming into this with very much virgin eyes, that they need to kind of take from what works, what has been tried for decades. And we know what works and what does not. One of the things that I want to go back to when you first started talking about contracts, you said, kind of like a side note almost, running through it, that it has no legal standing whatsoever. Now, I've seen 50 Shades of Grey. I've not read it, but they are sitting in a conference room at this big, massive table, and he's talking about how he needs this contract for legal purposes.
Yeah, and that's absolutely a fallacy from the movie and the book.
What?
And it I know there's some movies out there, they're going, what? We need this for legal purposes. No, they are absolutely not legal. They are there kind of, as you've put it to me before, as an old school way of your word is your bond, but they have no legal standing. So I really feel like the people coming into this just from 50 Shades of Grey need to know that, 100% know that. It won't do anything for them in the court of law. People in the legal stance are going to look at that and they're going to go, okay, why are you showing me this piece of paper? We don't care.
Yeah. Oops, I strangled her to death, and she said that it was okay to choke her, so I'm free and clear. I miss her, but I was doing what she wanted.
No, that person would be sent to prison for manslaughter.
Exactly. And it is very important for people to understand that some people that are very new think that, contracts, if they hold no legal standing, well, that's silly. No, it's not, because for me, the most helpful area of the contract is it forces complete and total communication. And there is so much bonding that takes place when you're negotiating this contract, because you're being so open and so honest about everything, as you should be the entire time. But it really puts it in your face and says, hey, this is an issue. This is not an issue. And just defines everything. And that's why I love the process of the contract.
I think a lot of that too is that BDSM isn't about sex. I know we try to keep this PG-13, but it's not necessarily about sex. It's more about intimacy. And there is nothing more intimate than going through and negotiating what is essentially your fantasies for intimacy.
Yeah. And the protocol outside of the sexual behaviors.
Yes, but those protocols, these protocols, these rules, they help you get on the same page with your partner.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good area to just go ahead into it. Not to interrupt. Go ahead and finish your thought.
I was just going to say that because they do bring you to the same page as your partner, you can more openly communicate.
Absolutely.
So back to our protocols talk.
Yeah, because this is something that you and I disagree on, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there, and I will probably receive some emails on this. Feel free. It's an open conversation. This is my opinion. This is not fact. But when it comes to a master-slave relationship, I am very much in favor of high protocol, because low protocol, I just don't get it. I don't see the point in it. And that comes from what I need. That is it. But you have already said you spent almost 3 years in a low protocol master slave relationship. So help me to understand your low protocol relationship and how I could possibly get something out of that.
Well, first, let me backtrack, because a lot of our listeners are newer to the lifestyle, by letting them know the difference and what high and low protocol is when we're talking about this.
Yeah, that's important.
Low protocol is that you recognize that there is a master-slave relationship. You call your dominant master, you will kneel, you'll do things for them that you are required to do. High protocol, I'll let you define, since you are so very fond of it.
It is the kneeling, but there's so much more that goes along with it. I mean, it is a very, very strict, and not to the Gorian style, and that's something that we're actually going to get into in its own episode, so I'm not really going to address that at all here. But there are certain positions that have to be learned, a certain way that I'm always addressed, that, a slave, no matter what the situation, she is not going to walk away from me with her back to me until she takes 3 steps backwards. And this is always, there is a very high level of respect. Not that in a low protocol there's not, but it's just very almost military style in the way that the relationship is managed. There are things that have to take place certain times, from the morning ritual and the coffee presentation, or however the day is started, all the way through the day to the very end. And whether or not someone is allowed to sleep with me for the night or not, I had one slave very briefly. This was a 6-month situation where there was actually a point system in the relationship because she was someone who had been very coddled her whole life, and she needed extreme protocol to be able to improve past the person that she was. And it was becoming a person that she wanted to be. But if there hadn't been these high protocols in place and a necessity for them and punishments if they were not followed, then she wouldn't have improved. And that relationship actually ended because she had reached the point that she wanted to be, and had also, in that, like yourself, she realized that she was a switch and she wanted to explore her more dominant side. And I felt that she would not truly be able to do that if she was my slave. So at that point, I released her, and she went on to continue to grow and work on herself, and is a very beautiful person today.
Getting back to the question you asked me, the reason why I was in a low protocol household was I had sent a series of texts to my master, and this was when we had first gotten together. We were in between our second draft and our final draft of contract, so it wasn't finalized yet. But I had sent him a series of texts one day, checking in with him throughout the day, and I had been using the high protocol form of writing. And this is another thing that you will see, especially if you go into online communities, just because you will see more writing between the dynamics.
Yes.
Slaves who are in high protocol, they will always use undercaps for themselves. They may even call themselves she or he, sometimes it, depending on their own views about themselves. But
This
they will
girl.
Always.
That was one of my favorites. This girl.
Yes, this girl. They'll use things like that and almost speak in the third person, because it objectifies themselves. And they will always use honorifics for others, but especially for their master or mistress. For example, I would be typing the word you for him, and I would capitalize the letter Y for you in the middle of a sentence, and it absolutely drove him insane. He told me he couldn't handle it. We put it in our contract. We went low protocol because of that. But the other appeal there is that it is a lot more relaxed. As you said, high protocol is very strict. It's a lot more relaxed. You still have the respect. There's still the communication, the love, the intensity of the master-slave dynamic. But as far as positions, I've seen some high protocol households where the master will literally just call out a number, and the slaves will go through these lists of positions and they just snap to it. I mean, it's not as fast as, lickety split, but they're moving in between them just on the flow of numbers. And it's a beautiful ballet to watch. But when you are in a low protocol household, you are still doing as you're expected, but there's not this string of command necessarily thrown at you.
And I would like to,
it's just a bit more relaxed.
I would like to address that actually. Those positions and that high protocol is very important to me. But what is more important to me is not how quick they get into that position, but how safely they do it. I do not want them to, when I call out a position, I do not want them to just drop to the floor, if that's the position, and hurt themselves. I want them to gracefully, it's about grace and etiquette, not just about the protocol. Why would I want to just bark a position at somebody and have them drop and bust their knees? This is somebody that I care about, somebody that I love and respect. So it's very important that people understand that too, that in that high protocol, high etiquette, that grace is also a very important thing to me.
I think that's actually true of all true dominant submissive relationships, no matter what level it is. I think any true dominant that has any care for their submissive wants their safety to come first.
Absolutely. I like how you say true dominance.
I have to say true dominance because I have no respect for the abusers out there that call themselves dominant.
Yeah,
and I fully admit to that. I have no respect for them.
And that links directly into what we were talking about before, with those that just get into it for their own self-gratification and their need to abuse people.
Yes.
But that's a whole nother psychology. Whether it's high protocol or low protocol, what about the rights, the master's rights, the slave's rights? A lot of people look at this from the outside with no knowledge, no information, and they think, well, the master has all the rights and the slave has none. So what is your take on that?
First off, absolutely not true. As a past slave, I can say that everything that happened in my relationship relationship is something that I consented to, communicated a desire for or an acceptance of, and then enjoyed on some level. I may not have enjoyed, absolutely, but there were things that I liked more than others and things I didn't like more than others. But I was still consenting to it, and I still had check-ins and safe words and signals, things there to protect me and make sure that my participation in the lifestyle was as enjoyable as it could be, along with my partners.
I think it's hard for people to remember because, especially with the terminology of master and slave, that the submissive or the slave actually has all the control because, and I'm going to say you, even though you're a switch, but if we were in this type of relationship, I would be the dominant, obviously. But you being the submissive would be the one to negotiate what I can and can't do to you in a scene or activities of daily living. You're the one that really has the ability to just stop everything at the moment. I mean, I do too, but chances are I wouldn't be using that because I would be the one doing what I wanted to do. So the slave, in my personal experience, is the one with the control. They're the ones giving up the control, but they can take it back at any moment, which is why I have so much respect for them because I push my slaves pretty hard. Self-improvement is very important to me, and that is something that is known going into every relationship that I have, that I am going to push you to improve yourself. It may be something very small. It may be something very big. There are certain areas that I do not touch, but in general, it is all about becoming a better person. Now I'm going to push myself even harder because I have to lead by example, as any true dominant is going to do. And I don't think that's an opinion. I think that's a fact.
I have to agree with you there. Anything that I ask of my submissive is something that I demand of myself at least twice as hard or twice as much of. If I'm going to ask somebody to be polite in public as a submissive, I'm going to lead by example, and that's not even really a DS thing. That's a vanilla thing. If you're polite, you teach others to be polite.
Yeah.
So that's a great example of it, I think.
Absolutely. In the episode that I did on humor, I gave examples of how I started and how it almost ended a relationship. My very first one in this lifestyle, because I was so just stone cold and stoic as I got into my dominant role, and was very quickly told that she entered the relationship because of who I was, but she would be ending it because of who I became if I did not change. She said, you don't change who you are because you're acknowledging your dominant side. And that was a lesson that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Don't adapt yourself into this role because it's what you think it needs to be in that way. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make, whether they're new or not.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
Well, moving on, completely changing gears here. This topic that I'm about to bring up is something that we are both extremely passionate about. It's something that we agree on, that I know from talking to you about this before. And I really don't even like talking about this topic, I'll be honest, because I can become overly passionate about it. So I'll try to hold that back a little bit, but the sharing or selling of slaves. Fire away.
Okay, I'm going to tackle the one that's really hard for us, and that is the selling of slaves. We're talking about in real life trying to sell another human being. First off, illegal. Secondly, highly immoral. It is something that is illegal and considered sex trafficking throughout most of the world. There might be some smaller third world countries. I truly discourage anyone from trying to look for these things, because to do this is so immoral. It strips away every particle that is the consensual form of BDSM, which is the only true form of BDSM. You have a person who has agreed to be your slave, who has agreed to give up a large part of who they are to you, and to throw that away or try to sell that or get a financial gain from it is absolutely disgusting abuse and cannot be condoned by anyone in this community.
Now, I have met people who did this with their slaves' consent, but you have to realize there's been recent laws passed that say that Johns are no longer let go. And if you're paying for sex, you're a John or a Jane. And you have to realize that now you're not just let go, you're arrested and charged with felony sex trafficking. So these are new laws that thankfully have been put into place. So accepting money for this, whether the slave is consenting to it or not, is still highly illegal. Now, what about sharing? Where do you stand on this?
Sharing is a different topic altogether for me if the submissive or the slave has agreed to it. And that's the if. It has to be something that is discussed, communicated, and agreed to before it's ever done. And I don't just mean, yes, you can share me with your friends, consent. I mean, yes, I am acceptable to have this person as the person I am shared with. It has to be very specific, I think.
But you know what my problem with this is? It is the fact that submissives are not always honest about it, and they will do it just because the master or the dominant wants them to. And it's very much my opinion that when this takes place, it's really rape. It's almost a rape of self because they're agreeing to it even though they don't really want to do it. And that can cause some psychological issues. So for me, this is something that really has to be thought about, talked about, and absolutely no pressure applied on this particular topic. If it's something that a dominant or a master wants, then I think they should really stop wanting it and bring it up once and let it be known that it was something that they would consider that they would like, and then let it go and never bring it up again. Let the slave or the submissive bring it up so that they're in control of it. Because to me, that's one of the things that's the only way that they can make their own educated and true decision on the matter, because it's such a sticky situation. Now, I have had a slave that wanted she came to me and she said, hey, I have some certain areas of personal growth. She was very abused, very shamed. She had been in therapy for it, and she felt that if she was allowed to be shared, and I know this may sound strange to some people, but if she was allowed to be shared, it was actually the sex with other people and being proud of it and not feeling so shamed by it, that she wasn't a dirty little whore or whatever, that it was okay that she could accept the fact that she's human and humans have a sexual side to them. So in that case, I heard her out, I listened, and I agreed, and I never once showed up with one of my buddies and said, hey, this is John, you're about to sleep with him. No, it was something that she would come to me and say, hey, there's this person or your friend, or male and female, actually. So that is the way that it should be done, in my opinion, because I know how much power that I have over the submissive, over the slave, and that is going to affect their decision. So if I bring it up more than once, then they're going to feel pushed, or they're going to start to feel pushed. And it's my job to make sure that they don't feel that way and that they know that they can be open and honest about everything. So if I've pushed them into anything at any point, no matter what it is, I've not done my job as a true dominant or a true master, or just to say it simply, which is a term that we haven't really got into yet, but a controlled dominant.
I have to agree with you there. I did have an experience in which I was shared, and it was something that I had asked for after several years with this particular dominant. And it was something that I had wanted. I picked out the people that it would be with, picked out the situation, and he basically just acted as the mediator and protector during that scene. It was a wonderful experience, and it can be if it is done correctly.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that we have given a very good representation of how we feel about that, both from the legal side of selling, the personal side of selling, just our general disgust with that, and the sharing. So do you have anything else that you'd like to add on that point?
Nothing on that point, no.
Okay. Moving on, with your experience in this, because I can't testify to this, but how is the headspace different in the submissive compared to the slave headspace?
I would say that it is more intense, that you give yourself more. And that's not to say that as a submissive, you don't give yourself. But I feel like as a slave, there is no holding back at all. As a submissive, you might hold back. You might go, oh, I'm with a play partner, or I just don't really feel this scene. I'm going to hold back a little bit mentally. And you can't do that as a slave. You can't. You have to be present. You have to be in the moment all the time. So when you go under, that's the term that's used for getting into the headspace, you go deeper. It's a deeper form of it.
Which we call that subspace typically, right?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
we do.
Making sure you referred to it the same as I do. Now, what about as a collared submissive, which is different from a collared slave?
As a collared submissive, again, you're going deep. But as I said with protocols, you're on the same page when you have a master. You're on the same page as a slave. You go in deep and you just stay there as a slave. As a submissive, even collared submissive, you do hold back. And I know that sounds terrible to say that as a collared slave you hold back, but there are moments when you take the collar off. Even if you live 24/7, you'll be at the grocery store, your dominant won't be there. You won't quite be in the same headspace as a slave would going to the grocery store without their master. It's just a very different feeling of intensity and awareness.
Now, were you allowed to go to the grocery store by yourself as a slave without your collar, or did you have a day collar, or how did that work?
I had a day collar, and not only was I allowed to go to the grocery store, I was sometimes expected to go on my own, where he would have other engagements like work, or he would have something with a family member that didn't include me, and I would be expected to go complete those chores. And I would have a grocery list just like anyone would, and I'd go to the store, but I would still uphold his ethics in public. And what I mean by that is when you are a slave, and this is true for submissives too, but on a different level. When you are a slave, it is like you are a permanent extension of your master or mistress at all times, whether they are there or not. So everything you do has to represent who they are with their ethics.
And I require that out of my submissives as well. I've said before in the podcast that if being a dominant was a storefront, then my submissive would pretty much be the mannequin in my front window that everyone would know me by. But I do agree that it is so much more intense as a master-slave dynamic, because that's when people are really watching that etiquette that the slave will represent.
Absolutely.
Now, we've got into so many different things on this topic. We've talked about the definitions, the rights, sharing, selling, headspace, protocol. Is there anything else that you can think of?
I don't have anything, but of course, if our listeners have any questions, they can contact us and let us know any questions or comments they have. And I'm sure we'll get plenty of those anyway.
And your email address is?
Funsize@kuldrinscrypt.com.
And mine is sir@kuldrinscrypt.com. Of course, just to make it easy for you, go to kuldrinscrypt.com. All the information is there. You can listen to the back catalog of this podcast, find out how to reach us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, join the Facebook group for Kuldrin's Krypt.
And next week on our agenda, we have Submission Without Sex. Be sure you don't miss it. In the meantime, be sure to check out our website at kuldrinscrypt.com. And while you're there, click on Support Us to find out how to receive Kuldrin's Krypt t-shirts, hoodies, or stickers.
This has been Master Kuldrin and Funsize for kuldrinscrypt.com.
Unearth the truth.